Hello, in this video I'm going to make a companion piece to the samurai face mask that I made in a previous video. And if you want to attempt this your own, whether it's with foam or whatever you want to make it out of, all the patterns for this are up on Facebook for free, and there will be a link to that in the description below. And without me rambling on anymore, let's go ahead and just get right into the video.
Okay, so first thing I've done here is cut out all my patterns, which is 2 number 3s, 2 number 2s, and 2 number 1s. And now that I have them cut out, I'm going to start applying contact cement everywhere. In the V-cuts, in the edges from 1 to 2 to be bonded, and from 2 to 3. And I'll start by closing the V-cuts and then putting each half together. Now, if you haven't used contact cement before, what I'm using is DAP Weldwood contact cement. I would recommend DAP or Barge. I wouldn't really mess around with any other brands. And how it works is you brush it on to your piece. I try not to put it on too thick, but just enough that the surface is covered. And once you get it evenly coated on each side to be bonded, you can't just put it on the one side and expect it to stick. You have to put it on both sides that you're going to be gluing together. And you let it sit for 15 to 20 minutes. A good way to tell, because it does vary whether you live in a humid environment or a desert environment. For example, I live in a high desert environment. The humidity is very low, generally around 13 to 30%. Rarely do we get over that. If we do, it's usually during monsoon season. But anytime the humidity is higher, it will take a bit longer to dry, okay? So 15 to 20 minutes, but never wait longer than an hour to put your two pieces together. For me, it usually takes just 15 minutes, living in the high desert. A good way to tell is if you touch it and it's still wet and sticky, it's not ready. Whenever the sides actually feel relatively dry and don't have a lot of tack left to them whenever you touch them, then they're pretty much ready to be bonded together. And despite your environment, that should be no longer than a half hour. However, I want to point out, whenever you do bond them together, after that period of time they've had to sit and cure, you have to have them lined up straight. Because if you don't, you can't take them back apart, generally without cutting or tearing or destroying. At that point, you got to start over. If that happens, try not to feel too frustrated. It's happened to me. It happens to everybody. Sometimes you just have to recut and reglue or just cut a new piece and start over. And for this, I'm using some 6mm to 7mm, depending on where you measure it. If you measure it on the bumps, it's 7. If you don't, it's 6. But a little bit thicker foam. I didn't want to use a full half-inch thick EVA foam floor mat because I didn't want to have to struggle with rounding it out and shaping it with the heat gun later. So I'm going to let all this sit for 15 minutes and we'll come back and start putting it all together. Okay, this has had the 15 minutes. So first I'm going to start off with lining up and gluing together the V-cuts. And then start gluing them all together. Next, I'm going to take some more of my contact cement yet again, go over both edges of the number 1 pattern so that I can join both number 1s together. Okay, both halves have been glued together to form the base shape of the helmet. And next, I'm going to use my heat gun to help round this out some, because you don't want pointiness at your seams. But unless I put a million V-cuts in this, I wasn't really sure how else I could or would go about it. So heat gun, mannequin head, shaping. Okay, to do the heat forming and to assist in getting this round, I have this canvas Hatmaker's mannequin head. And with the height of this, I actually had to sit it up on something. I don't know how well this is going to look or work trying to film heat forming this, but I'm still going to try. The thing is, you don't necessarily need to have one of these or go out and purchase one of these. I know people who have used grapefruits that were a little underripe and they're a bit hard. You could use a round wooden knob from a banister. You could use anything. I've even used my knee before I had this. One thing I will say is don't use anything styrofoam or that will melt, because heat guns and hot and melting. Okay, so that was all stuff assisted with the mannequin head just to help round all this out and try to get some of the knobbiness out of it. The mannequin head does help a lot. I also am going to heat it through the inside, but not really going to show that on camera. For this side piece here, I'm not going to use anything. Just going to use my hands. Okay, so here you can see the difference between the heated and shaped side and the unheated and unshaped side. Quite a difference in profile and look. Okay, so there it is with my basic heat forming done. I'm going to go through and repeat this process on the inside, heating it and trying to smooth out the little bit of ridge left in here. I really don't want to have to Dremel this at all, to be honest. I don't think I will, since I'm going to have pieces running along here to cover this most likely. But yeah, that was the shape that I was hoping for. And I say hoping because whenever I make these patterns, I sculpt something, and sometimes whenever I cut them and heat them, they don't always work out. But this is looking pretty good so far. Okay, I've got my shaping done. I'm going to start decorating it. First piece I'm going to start with is the visor. Granted, most of this is, as I've mentioned, I intend on mentioning in the opening of the video, is very much so fantasy. This is not how the majority of realistic samurai helmets looked. They usually had a series of plates that were flexible and moved. You know, this is more meant so if you want to make a shredder. Oroko Sake from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles helmet, it'll be pretty simple to alter these patterns. But I am going to put on some features, one of which is a visor, which is pretty standard. Sometimes it's one piece, sometimes it's two, sometimes it's mobile, sometimes it's attached. But I'm doing that. However, I did cut this at an angle, but it's just not enough of an angle. I'm going to have to Dremel this down to get it to fit as flush and smoothly as possible against this. Okay, I put on my visor, and I did mark in the center of it. I just folded it in half and marked the center with a marker, so I could line that up with the seam that runs through the center, and just followed it around and ended on the seams on both sides. And this is just a piece of 2mm EVA foam that I cut and then contact cemented from the front all the way to the rear. And these I used on the face mask in the previous video, but if you didn't see that video, I'll go over real quick what they are. They are 10mm thick dowels, EVA foam dowels by yayahan.com. They're 24 inches in length. And what I did with them was cut them straight down the middle so that I ended up with this. And you'll notice this point right here. How I got that point was simply by taking my dowel that I had cut in half, and then I just snipped it at an angle. That didn't work out. Snipped it at an angle, which gives you this nice little rounded off edge that I just started it with. And the excess that went around the back, I just trimmed off with scissors. Nice and simple. But of course, you can decorate yours however you want. I'm just going with the route that it makes it easy to cover the seams without me having to do a ton of sanding or silicone work. So, yeah. Okay, I continued to put some of that half-cut EVA foam dowel around the edging here. And next what I want to do is attach this, which is the Crescent Pattern. And I took two pieces of 5mm EVA foam, cut them out, glued them together, squared them off by sanding them down with a Dremel. And I'm going to glue some blocks of foam together with the angle that I want so that I can attach this how I want. Okay, so to attach this, I simply took some EVA foam wedges, glued them together, and then sanded them with my Dremel to the angle that I wanted. Line it up in the center and put it on. There's no pattern piece for that. If you don't have anything but 5mm foam, you could put 3 to 4 pieces of that together, sand it to the angle, or if you have a bandsaw or something, I suppose you could cut it. But I don't have those types of tools. I just use scissors and my Dremel. So I suppose I'd also show you the inside. I did use some chunks of 1/2-inch thick foam to pad this, so it will sit evenly on my head. This is way too large for my head, and it would cover my eyes otherwise. But with at least somewhat trying to blend in between fantasy and reality of samurai helmets. They actually had a thing they wore on their head that their helmets went on top of that kept it raised considerably off their head and was padded. I can't think of the name of that offhand, but yeah, that was my solution for that. Okay, the next pieces I've cut out are the top plate and the flat end here. He'll cut out another one, and those will be joined together with contact cement unless you just have enough foam that you could put the pattern out and make one long piece. I didn't have long enough pieces to do that. I can buy long enough pieces, but I just don't have any in my possession. And how this is going to work is, this is the top plate, so it's going to get glued from basically right here, slightly underneath the helm, and go, or well, sorry, the visor on the helmet, and go around like that. I did not put in pattern pieces for any subsequent plates. So as many or as little as you want to do, you can, but you're going to need to extend them out. So I'll give you a quick description of how I did that. So first, I traced out my bottom piece, and then once I had that traced, I didn't draw the line on the end, but I followed the lines and extended it out. And then once I did that, I had a longer piece, which will go in the middle. But then I went 3 plates, so for the bottom, I did the same thing again, where I took and, traced out my pattern, and then slid it forward along those lines, and just did that. I'm ultimately going to have to custom trim these, and I did make them estimatedly much longer than what I needed. So any sort of overlap I'm going to have to cut and trim to shape. Alright, I lined up and glued on my first 2, but you may notice that there is sort of a bell shape to this, and that is because I heated it on the back side and curved it. Another thing I did, I should point out, is I did cut the inside edge here that is going to be glued to the mask at as much of a 45-degree angle as humanly possible. I didn't go back through and clean it up with the Dremel, but I did the best I could. I just cut all this with scissors too. I haven't used an X-Acto knife once on this entire project. I've just used scissors. So if X-Acto knives and things like that intimidate you, or you don't want to spend the money on an X-Acto knife and a cutting mat, I don't feel like you really need to, unless it's for ego or to show on an Instagram clip or something. I just use a pair of well-worn but sharp scissors. That's it. Okay, I lined up and glued all of them on, and I just used thumbtacks to make rivets. I think something that would look a lot better than thumbtacks would be carpenter tacks, or sorry, not carpenter tacks, upholstery nails or upholstery tacks. They're much more rounded on the top. However, downside of that is they're almost at least twice as long about as the pin on this, so they will definitely stick through. So you'll have to cover those with hot glue or foam or something to not have them possibly stab you in the head, but those would definitely look better. I also happen to have some of this textured EVA foam, and particularly the texture on this is very cool. It reminds me a little bit of the ray skin or shark skin. I want to say ray skin was more common than shark skin, but it was used underneath the traditional wrap on the samurai's katana. It helps hold the wrap in place, and just, it looks cool. Katanas are beautiful creations of Japanese engineering throughout the years. But these pieces I cut out, they're symmetrical. There's no pattern for it. I just did it because I want it, but I wanted some extra texture or something, and I'm just going to put those basically in there. Okay, I got my textured pieces on, and I wanted to do Miyamoto Musashi's 5 ring symbol, but it just wasn't working out. How I actually did this is I just ground into it with the tip of a Dremel on various pieces of scrap foam until I got 3 circles, and then I just cut the triangle out around it and glued it on. Now I'm going to go ahead and seal this up with some Mod Podge. I'm not going to film this because it's going to take forever, for one thing, and I'm not going to be able to properly fit it in the camera as I do it. Okay, I sealed this. It's had plenty of time to dry, so I'm going to go ahead and paint it black with some just regular old Rust-Oleum cheap spray paint. Okay, all the primer is done and looks pretty cool. I'm pretty stoked to go through and do the rub and buff and some dry brushing. much it. I did dry brush the gold over the silver on the piping on the sides off camera, and I did paint the 3 circles more of a solid silver. But yeah, rub and buff pewter for everything, and then Model Masters gold, same as I did for the face mask. And once again, this is not in the slightest meant to be historically accurate. I just wanted to do something I'd look cool, and I like these 2 colors. I feel kind of like Yukon Cornelius. Leave a comment if you know what that reference is to. But yeah, definitely not anything color or even shape wise historically close, but looks pretty cool. And I mean, that's ultimately what I was hoping to get, was less realistic, more sucker punch-esque unrealistic. Okay, so I did take and cut a shoestring in half and just glued that up inside at a point that I figured it would be comfortable under my chin. If you're not sure, you could always use a thumbtack or something to pin it in place and move it around and adjust it as you like. Now, let's talk real quick about customization on your own project, or even for myself for future projects. So, as I've kind of mentioned before, this base pattern would make a good shredder helmet, more so than anything samurai related. But these plates, especially if you're a cosplayer that wants to pose, or wants to pose with a sword over your head, depending upon how broad your shoulders are, when you lift your arms up, it may just knock your helmet off, or you may not be able to lift your arms up, especially if you have any sort of like shoulder pauldron type armor going along with this. I'll demonstrate this in some video clips, but there are solutions for that. If you ever looked at samurai helmets, you'll notice that these are oftentimes not solidly attached to something. Like, I have these fake rivets and such, and I glued them on. But you could actually just cut this pattern off here, and the under pattern, that is, and just use the plates. And instead of having the plates solidly attached, you could have them attached with paracord or string or whatever you want, elastic, whatever you want, to one another periodically as they go around. That way, if you lift your shoulders, the plates would flex and move. When I lift my shoulders too high, or if I don't open up my upper back enough, it wants to push this up or just knock it off my head. In fact, before I'd even painted it, I put it on to test how it would work raising up my shoulders with my sword, and whenever I did so, it literally just fell off my head. Luckily, it was not damaged. But I'm going to throw this on and let you guys check out what it looks like as far as mobility, and hopefully that'll help you get an idea how you want to proceed if you're thinking about doing this project.
So yeah, that's what I mean about raising your arms up over your head. And that's just wearing a t-shirt. I don't have any like actual armor on. That would help push this up more. So that's what I mean about, instead of having one solid piece, have a bunch of pieces that you tie together with strips of leather or something, so that if you do move your shoulders, the helmet itself can move. And there's plenty of documentaries on YouTube about samurai helmets that you can look at. Also, would probably not just use a string, would actually make a chin strap and have something that has several points of contact to the inside of the mask that goes down to one thing that goes on your chin, just to make sure that it's not going to come loose or come off. Okay, so that's pretty much going to wrap it up for this video. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and it gave you some ideas for your own projects. Like I see, the patterns are up on Facebook for free if you want to check that out. And as always, thank you for watching, and have a great day.